think in that sense, in Israel, unlike in the US, making a faith choice, especially if it's not a mainstream one, it comes with a price. You don't just do it because other people are doing it. You have to really want to do it, really want to be a disciple because it came with a price.
Hey, Mati Shoshani, it's so good to have you on InGrace. I apologize for butchering your name. It's an easy one.
Yeah, for an Israeli ear.
But in your last name, it's connected to
Shoshani. Yeah, Shoshani.
Which is in Persia.
So my father's family comes from what was Persia and is now the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Wow.
But from a city called Shushan biblically.
Right.
Of course, it has a different name today.
Do you know when your ancestors would have been there and everything?
Let's start from the 2 steps back. Everyone in this country is an immigrant. So we're really good here at sort of tracking the story of how do you get to a place, what you're doing here, why are you here. We know in this year, I have my great-great-great-grandfather on my dad's side. His father's side came on a donkey from, Iran. And the mother's side came on, however they got here from what is today's Georgia. And my mother's an American Jew, but they all came from Eastern Europe too. And they left, when all the, Eastern European Jews left, which was the turn of the previous century. And usually it's not in good circumstances.
Right.
Usually it takes someone who doesn't really favor the Jews to say, we're changing the laws, and everyone's like, thank you, we're out. And thankfully they ended up here.
What's it like to be part of a group of people that has been so maligned and so hated for no reason, persecuted?
I grew up in Israel.
Yeah.
I don't feel persecuted.
No, but your ancestry. I mean, like you said, they had to move for a reason, right? I mean, that's a unique thing to pretty much not to say no other group of people gets persecuted, but over the centuries,
systematically,
the millennia, it's been the Jews. Why?
I think that's a very good question. Because people, and including myself, we tend to only imagine our place in time and history in very short term. We think about the life we live. We're unaware usually of the baggage that we carry leading into that moment. But the history of our people, the people we are, it's a very strong element of who we are as a people. My wife, who's an immigrant to Israel too, she came from the US originally, she describes us as a PTSD nation because we bear the trauma of both, all of the history, but also just being in constant war and threat. So there's a positive side to it, which is the ingenuity, the thrive to excellence, this very strong sense of togetherness and direction. There's a negative side to it, which is where, the fearfulness, the concern, the lack of trust, the us versus them kind of mindset. But in the big picture, and I like the big picture, think about the history of the Jewish people. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the persecution. And there would be no Hebrew, and there would be no Jewish people, and there would be no Hebrew in the land of Israel if it wasn't for persecution. And I'll say this from a faith perspective, people read the Bible and they think of God's promise as something that happens. I mean, yes, his promise is true, but people don't envision how hard it is to get to that point. So, Jesus says to his disciples, he says, all this is going to happen. It does happen. He just doesn't tell them, well, it's going to be really rough getting to that point. And the same with the Jewish people. God promises us, you're going to return to the land and we're going to turn to the language and all these prophetic things are going to happen. But, and it's a big but, you're going to have to suffer severely to get to this point.
We're doing a story on Mary and Joseph for Christmas. And the angel Gabriel announced to her that she would be blessed and blessed and all of that. So what if Gabriel had told her everything that she was going to have to go through to get to this ultimate point of, providing the Messiah?
Jim, what if I told you? Said, you're going to get this big prize, but it's coming in 7 generations. Would you be able to work towards that? Would you be able to go into, day after day of a bad day at the office, knowing that the payment or the fulfillment of that promise is happening not to your kids, not to their kids, but multiple generations forward? And I think the answer is no for most people. I mean, it takes a very unique type of leader or a person to be able to project into the future and sacrifice today for generations to come. It's very rare to find that, and I think God contends with human nature in that sense, and he presents what people are able to deal with and works with what humanity is able to bring to the table.
The reason that I know you and I appreciate you first was when I started to see some of the programming that you host and produce in Insights in Israel and the Middle East. and other programs. And I was just so impressed by the style that you have, the knowledge, the softness, but the energy. So Mati, you are the Director of Operations for TBN Israel, and I've really appreciated your programming insights in Israel and the Middle East.
Thank you.
How did you get to this point to do what you're doing today? Were you born in Israel? Maybe start with that.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Israel. I was born in Haifa, which is up on the northern part of the coast. Lived in Jerusalem, or, well, we can't say it's a hazy day, but right over to the east of us, and then in the city, and now I'm to the west of the city, which is sort of a typical trend for people in this area of Jerusalem. And I ended up at TBN. It's a long story, I'll try to make it short. I was meeting with Samuel Smadja, who's the director of TBN, in previous work. I just meet with him to chat every, 4, 5, 6 months. How are things going in life? He's a very wise and slightly older individual. And I was on the way out of a previous workplace, and he said, well, I think I have some people you need to meet, sat me down with the Crouches. I want to say this is 9 years ago at this point, 8.5, 9 years ago. And said, well, we're going to build a studio in Jerusalem. And when we started, none of this existed. This was a residential building. It's been retrofitted completely. The interesting part is you never imagine life. I never imagined life, what it takes to be able to do the things that you want to be able to do. And what we have today, being able to craft stories in a way that is compelling, in a way that I think our team thinks, it really unpacks the mystery, the riddle of this country in a way that people are able to consume it and understand something that is real about humanity, something that's real about God's work in this land. It took a lot to get to that. And we were talking off camera. I've had the huge blessing of working with top-notch people, and over time figuring out how to tell the story, and over time figuring out really what. And again, so it's a visual medium, so you have to think about both the content, the expertise, and how it looks on camera. Really getting good at understanding how to do that. I don't do this alone. We have an amazing team of people that we work with.
Tell me your faith journey.
So the headline would be, I'm a Messianic Jew. And I'd explain that in different ways to different people. To Israelis, I just say I'm a Jew that believes that the Messiah that we all believe in is Yeshua, Jesus, this man that you call the Christian Messiah. But to a Christian audience or to an American audience, it's a little different. All these terms come very loaded culturally. And they say to you, Christianity, you think one thing. I say Christianity, I think something entirely different. I'll try to simplify. In the same way that Christianity both implies or applies to your nationality, your identity, your culture, your religion, your faith, but it's not all of them. It could be part of them or it could be all of them. It doesn't fully explain what it means. Being Jewish is the same thing. Being Jewish is nationality, it's ethnicity, it's religion, it's faith. And on top of all those layers of being a Jew in the land of Israel, which is the Jewish place, I believe that the Messiah that I believe in, Yeshua, Jesus, he's the Jewish Messiah. It's a combination of the Jewish culture and religion with this Messiah. I was born into it. I had the blessing of being born into a Messianic Jewish family, but I actually left the faith in high school, actively throughout the army. I spent 5 years in the army, and I chose to come back to this faith and this lifestyle towards the end of my military service. And I think in that sense, in Israel, unlike in the US, making a faith choice, especially if it's not a mainstream one, it comes with a price. You don't just do it because other people are doing it. You have to really want to do it. Now it's easier than it was, but especially 20 years ago, you really had to want to be this, really want to be a disciple because it came with a price.
Your programming, you, like me, get to do a lot of pretty fun things, pretty cool
meet
places,
a
lot of, and you especially have, because TBN has done these great specials about, the Abraham Accords, amazing work, and other things that are coming out. So you've met pretty much all of the famous people that come through Israel. When you look at your work, whether it's telling a story about archaeology, I just watched one that you did about the Garden Tomb with the caretaker of the Garden Tomb, and just the variety of things that you get to do on a daily basis. What's that like?
If I think about what my daily motivator is, it's people. Like the days I end a day and say, like, this was a really good day, is a day where you got a real connection with someone. And I personally get to spend a lot of time with really interesting people. And it's done two really big things for me. One, it strongly affirms and encourages me on a personal level, faith-wise, just like in the place we are in life. And two, it diffused a lot of the cynicism I had towards Israel. Because this is, it's a land of promise and the land of God's fulfillment of promise. but it's still a rough country to live in, just like any other country, and even more so. It's tense, it's stressed, it's angry, there's a lot of emotion going on in this place. And if you live here every day, which I do, it's oppressive. And Jerusalem's a tough city. And if you let that get to you, you lose sight, even on an emotional level, of the importance of the things that are happening here. And because I get to stop and talk to people that are coming through, or people who are really experts or doing something unique in this land, it really pulls you out of the day-to-day grind and allows you to look down and say, from sort of a bird's eye view, look at what's been happening here. Look at the trend going back and look at the incredible things that are happening today. And it's been hugely encouraging.
Some of the episodes that I really loved, one was you did one on water. And it's such a simple thing, but you live in a very arid climate. I've seen a few clouds since we've been here, but not many. But Israel is actually a water exporter, which is incredible. And that's
unique,
more just lately, right? Because they've gotten these desalinization plants online and really going. So talk about that episode and the fact that water is life, maybe connecting Jesus, the living water, things like that.
So there's multiple levels to that. But if you start from the spiritual one, you read these biblical prophecies of, or promises of a person who believes, or a nation who believes, because God is a collective God. He works through groups of people, not just individuals, especially here in this neighborhood. And it says, okay, so there's going to be springs of living water coming out of your nation. Well, what does that look like? Is it just a spiritual blessing? Is it just the Bible blessing? Or is it a practical blessing too? So it's all of the above in this case. And God works through people. I mean, I strongly believe that. Those people are not necessarily aware of the miracle that they're living in because it's just another day at the office. But at the end of the process, we're in a country that doesn't have enough water. We don't have any resources. And we're exporting water to our neighbors, both the people within the Palestinian Authority and then to a larger degree to Jordan, which is part of the peace accords with Jordan from the early 90s. But more than just the water, the physical sort of element of water, we're exporting water knowledge to many, many countries in the world. In fact, if you look at most of the G2G, government-to-government relationships we have, a big portion of that is us helping other countries, even countries that have water, understand how to manage their water resources. You have this kind of land with this kind of climate, with this kind of water resources or availability. How do we turn that into, giving, water to the people, water for agriculture, all the resources that a country needs. So it's the whole regimen of that. And I guess I'm trying to it's a very complicated answer, I guess, but when you look at it, it's many people that are doing interesting things that in the big scheme of things are doing something that is supernatural and incredible.
Exporting water and technology.
And knowledge,
And in that show, I learned that 90% of water used in Israel is recycled.
Reclaimed, yeah.
And what's the next highest country? Spain, with like a 20% or lower than that. That's remarkable. And do you believe that that's God's blessing on a unique and called out people?
It's a blessing in disguise. And I think this is going back to Western mindset. People believe if I say, Jim, you're going to live a blessed life, you don't expect to be like we are now, sitting and sweating, in the sun or laboring or struggling. But the reality is, if you read the biblical scripture and if you look at the historical application of what that promise looks like, it's never easy. There's this term in macroeconomics of the wealth or the resource curse, because too much of a good thing is a bad thing. Too much oil, too much water, it makes you lazy, it makes you complacent, it makes you lose sort of the drive to battle with things. Think about the late 1800s. You have tens of thousands of Jews that return to this land, and they say, well, we have this mindset of returning to the land, reclaiming it, rebuilding it, cultivating it. There's no water, there's no technology, the land is dead. And it's dead because of the result of poor leadership, Ottoman and many others before that for centuries that just depleted what this land had to offer. And they have to come up with very creative solutions that are very hard to get to. The drip irrigation. Why did they do that? Because of the salinity of the land and the heat that just made everything evaporate. You can't just take a hose and water the plants. It's all these small solutions that come under pressure and under the heat of this place. But again, I'm a spiritual person. That's the story of the Bible. name a hero of the Bible where, the story is they lived an easy and fun life, and therefore we're still talking about them 3,000 years later. That doesn't exist.
Hebrews 11, I believe, is exactly what you're talking about, the heroes of the faith. And all of them, were in the mouths of lions and were torn asunder, and all of these awful things that happened.
But they're out here. I mean, they're 10 miles east in that direction. You've been in the Israeli desert. They're suffering. They're sweating. They're struggling emotionally, physically, spiritually, and out of that comes something good. And that's the story of our nation in this country.
I also appreciated one episode. It might have been a long time ago, but you interviewed a pilot, and I believe he was part of the...
That's a different series.
Okay.
That's
either way, but it was still a show, and I think you have you have a Matty with hair, Mati with hair, and you have a Mati
with hair, younger, happier, healthier,
the new Mati. So, but that was impressive.
Smokey Simon.
Okay.
He was, I want to say it was like in his 90s when we filmed the episode with him. And I think that's a great story, because in our mind, in my mind at least, we have this notion of, things happen in history, and if I don't do it, someone else will do it, kind of thing. And the deeper we go into these stories in the history of Israel, you find out that isn't the case. And so the guy you mentioned, his name was Smokey Simon. I'm hoping I'm not messing up the story. I think he's Australian originally, an Australian Jew who fought in World War II. And there was something called Gachal, Gius Chutz Laaretz, the recruitment of foreigner Jews, mostly Jews, who came and volunteered in 48 and 49 in the Independence War. And it was him, and I want to say like a dozen other pilots. And the way they brought the airplanes into Israel was they dismantled them and put them in parts in the belly of airplanes, brought them into Israel. And they didn't have ammunition, so they were throwing, again, this is a while ago when we recorded this, throwing gas canisters over, Lebanon and Syria to make the appearance of us having a real Air Force. And he says, I think we asked him, what did you regret? The guy starts tearing. He said, if there were only more people. So why do you say that? He said, because if there were more, it would have been a shorter war. We would have had more people to fight with us. And it sort of clicks when you meet these people that were the pioneers of something in this country. It wasn't 100 people. It was 4 people. It was one person who just had this deeply imprinted vision of what was right to do, and they did it. They sacrificed their life, their energy, their family, but they did something that was unique, and it was just them or just a handful of people. If you go down the rabbit hole, you always come to the fact that it's just a handful of incredible people who had a strong enough image of this is the right thing to do in this place, and they went with it. And it's possible that if there were 10 other people, it would have happened faster or with less human sacrifice. But, still we're here today. But I think it's an amazing example of how that works here.
How do you come up with your episodes, the series that you do? I know you have a team, but do some of these stories come to you? Are you guys researching these things?
We start usually with a concept of like what we think would be an interesting topic to discuss. Water and energy were some of them, but it's sometimes it's more specific things. And then we start sort of doing like an initial brainstorm. Who do we know on this topic? What have we heard on this topic? Again, we've been doing this for a while, so we know a lot and we've heard a lot of stories. And then we'll try to reach out to a bunch of people and say, like, what exists that we can show visuals of? Are there organizations? Are there people? Are there government agencies that are doing this? And then we sort of circle back and say, like, okay, so these are the topics we discussed. What do we have that can work? And we go from there. Some we say, well, we don't have enough of a story. We put this on the back burner. Some we do, and we say, okay, well, let's pursue this kind of thing. And the more we've done it, the better we've become at identifying that early on and not ending up on set with, like a story that doesn't work or someone whose English isn't good enough to really express the value of what they're doing.
One of those stories that I appreciated was how Hebrew was reborn as a language.
And it's an incredible story because, to me, Hebrew's obvious. To you, Hebrew's obvious. You walk in the street, we speak Hebrew. And when you you follow that story, you realize it was not at all an obvious or linear process in any way, shape, or form. And it took several insane people. I mean, insane would be a compliment. Eliezer ben Yehuda, the father of modern Hebrew, and a bunch of other people that sort of picked up on his passion and said, let's do this. Let's force our kids to do this. And again, it goes back to this basic fundamental point of all these incredible things that happen here. To go from the biblical verse that talks about a restoration of the language of the Hebrew in this land through the Hebrew people, through the Jewish people. People think it'll be just like this, bang moment and it'll happen. That's not the case. It takes a guy who all his neighbors, all his friends at the time would call him Meshigana, our crazy neighbor Eliezer. He's forcing his son to do this. But out of that, this obsessive mindset comes what is, for all matters in effect, an incredible miracle that we're living in today. And again, I go back to this basic fundamental story is everything we're living in seems obvious and linear and a natural progression to us, and none of it is. All of it, when you go back to the root of it, is something that shouldn't have happened, and yet we get to the benefit of living in that reality, that simple reality today.
And you see God involved in that.
100% of the time.
Well, how important is Hebrew? Because, there are some that think now the Semitic languages came from Hebrew.
Yeah.
The paradigm earlier was that Hebrew came out of a Semitic language, but there's a lot of evidence piling up that it was one of the first alphabetic languages you can easily write and read and study and know, and the common people.
Yeah.
And you would have to, if God gave you the scriptures to teach your children and to read and all of that, you'd have to be able to read and write as a group. Before the alphabet, you couldn't do that because it was so complicated.
Yes and no. So yes, Hebrew is very ancient in the original font, but it's the same language exactly. The alphabet is the same. The way it's read is the same. I, as a modern day Hebrew speaker, am unable to read ancient Hebrew because the font is a much different, just the letters look different. But if it's explained, it's exactly the same text. But early Hebrew is, like many of the ancient traditions, is communicated orally versus as a written language. I mean, think about let's call it before the first temple is built, before you have a strong priestly presence in the land. And the priests, again, so this is the upper echelon of society. They have the time, the leisure, the money to practice reading, writing, poetry, to make the traditions of the religion and the faith into a complex pattern as it is, as we know it today. To get to that point, you had a whole, over 1,000 years of just father passing on to son, and only a very small portion of society being the ones who could read and write. So a lot of the Hebrew tradition, a lot of what is considered Judaism today was all the way into, definitely the Babylonian exile, but many of it is 1,500 years later, is already in the second exile in Europe. Now, a lot of it is transferred orally from father to son, which is why everything is sung in Hebrew. If you open most of the text of the Bible, all the Siddur, our prayer book, all of that is liturgy, it's sung. It's you sing together because the best way to memorize things, and that, again, you can talk for an hour about the spirituality of that, is the best way for a child to memorize something is to sing it. That's why you sing the ABCs. It's because the pattern is built into our brains to be able to absorb a memory. But to answer the question, yes, Hebrew is very important in the sense that it's a very early record, of a godly text to humanity that has remained with us till this day. And in that sense, as it encapsulates an encounter between a deity and a people, it is the earliest that we know of. And again, you can look at the history and the archaeology of that. People, 50, 60 years ago, the most prevalent sort of trend in the academy was criticizing the biblical scripture. No, it's later. No, it's an adaptation. No, it's critical writing that's written 200-300 years later. And all this changes when they find the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Dead Sea Scrolls basically say, here's a snapshot into time that you said wasn't possible, and it proves beyond doubt that 2,000 years ago or longer, these same texts that we read today, many of them foretell something that hasn't happened yet. So it was written and encapsulated in time in a cave before these events took place. This text hasn't changed. And then you're able to go back and look at the Bible as it's read today, compare it to the way it was read 2,000 years ago, and say, well, we're still pretty close to the mark. So if you're a person of the Bible, Christian, Jewish, that's a very strong statement. That's a very strong proof of the validity of what God says, and also this concept that the Bible isn't just a guy writing a book. It's it's people inspired by God throughout history who are writing a book.
And the transmission of that, since we don't have the originals, had to be God preserved. How can these texts be copied so accurately over time? And the Dead Sea Scrolls do give you that bridge of 1,000 years. And not just that, but other archaeological discoveries. It seems to me like Israel is just almost every day, there's something else found here that's substantial.
Yeah.
So How exciting is that you get to tell those stories?
I deeply care about these things. I deeply care about them in the sense that today when we talk about sort of the mythological characters of the Bible, King David, the fathers, the patriarchs of the Jewish people. You think about King David, you think about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. You can't prove through archaeology that Abraham walked in a place. You can't prove through archaeology that, that King David walked in a certain street or slept in a certain bed. But there's so much evidence that's been uncovered in recent generations that proves everything on the circumstances of their life. Where the boundaries of the kingdom were. The house of David existed as a monarchy, that existed as a kingship in Jerusalem that had regional power. On the fact that the city of David existed where it makes sense to, over there. All these little things that sort of add up to the fact that if we take a snapshot in time, today we discuss, King David is a good example. Today it's sort of, there's very little debate that King David existed, that his descendants were kings, that the boundaries of the kingdom that are described in the Bible were as they are described in the Bible. And when I was born 30-something years ago, that wasn't the case. You didn't have any of that evidence. It was all sort of hearsay. It was all, we think that he existed in the same way that we think King Arthur existed. I mean, that was a level of proof that we had. So in that sense, you look at this and where we are today, that's huge. Huge for us as believers, people who believe the Bible is more than just a story. And it's huge if you're a people living in this land that are claimed to fame, are claimed to a connection to this land, is both spiritual and biblical and historical. That's a strong connection. Being able to say, I'm not a visitor in this land. I'm not the Jews that came back. I'm the Jews that are continuing what already existed here for millennia. That's a big difference. So my kids complain. I take them hiking a lot. Abba, why are we going to another place with old stones? My answer to them is because these stones prove our connection to this land. Because this is where Abraham was, Tel Beersheva. This is where David was, here in these places. This is where Yeshua, Jesus, walked, that we know it happened in this place. It's for me, it's a very powerful experience.
You talk about Yeshua, and there are predictions that he's coming back. There's a huge future.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about today, you're talking about yesterday, and centuries before.
Are we going into eschatology?
No, but just...
Should I put on my...
Just the idea that, Orthodox Christianity believes in the return of Christ in some way.
Everyone, Jim, everyone believes in the return of Christ.
Yeah, so what's that?
Every monotheistic religion believes in that.
That's true.
Yeah.
Now, but what is that then to you, living here, knowing that there's an incredible future in this place?
I hesitate to go into the discussion of what is going to happen. There's a statement we say in Hebrew, prophecy is given to the foolish. I don't know what it says exactly in English. And I'm not sure who said this. I apologize for using this quote. It's live your life as if Messiah is returning tomorrow, build the church as if he's returning in a century. And, you can't live with a doubt about maybe everything will end tomorrow, because we need to be able to plan into the future.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we can't live our lives and build our communities and build our families as if there's no sense of urgency, because there is a sense of urgency on our life. And living here in Israel, it's a good question. I mean, are we going into war? What does Armageddon mean? What does all this, end time text mean? I don't know. It's so, and I think it's unclear for a purpose. It's unclear because we're supposed to focus on the today and the now and doing the right thing. And, all these vague things that are not entirely clear. What day is it going to happen? I'm focused on, what we can tell today. I'm focused on what you can do with the community today, what you can do with your family, with your personal life today. And when, Messiah returns, I think there won't be a discussion about it. He's coming back. They say, well, I was right, I was wrong. At least we know we did what we could till that point.
Yes. And my dad used to say something like that, and maybe he got it from the same quote that he said it in a little more simple way. Live like it could happen today, but plan like it could be 1,000 years.
Same.
So it's been a joy to sit down and get to know you. I've been watching your programs and just really enjoying them and learning. I love television that is enjoyable, and I learned something from it. So you've done it.
Appreciate it.